The silver Bentley glided through the rain-slicked streets of the city like a shark through dark water, its windows tinted against the desperate glitter of the night. Alara stood shivering in the alley behind Le Ciel Brisé, the city's most exclusive restaurant. The dumpster lid was cold and heavy under her hand, the air thick with the ghost of truffles and wasted wine. Inside her threadbare coat, she clutched a single, grease-stained container. This was her ritual, her shameful pilgrimage for survival. "Please," she whispered to the universe, her breath a pale plume in the frigid air. "Just a little tonight." The back door swung open, casting a rectangle of golden light onto the wet asphalt. Marco, the sous chef, emerged, his face a mask of weary indifference. He held a small bag. "Here," he grunted, thrusting it at her. "Bread ends. A bit of soup that got cold." Alara's heart, a fragile bird in her chest, fluttered with a pathetic gratitude. "Thank you, Marco. Thank you so much." But as her fingers brushed the bag, a deeper voice, smooth and cold as polished granite, cut through the night. "Marco." A word. The sous chef froze, his posture snapping straight. Alara looked up, and her world tilted. Framed in the doorway was a man she'd only ever seen in glossy magazine spreads. Alexander Thorne, the millionaire owner of this culinary empire, a man known for his ruthless business acumen and a heart rumored to be carved from ice. He was taller than she'd imagined, his broad shoulders filling his impeccably tailored charcoal suit. His face was all sharp, aristocratic lines, his eyes the color of a winter storm. His gaze swept over Marco, then down to Alara, huddled in her damp, second-hand clothes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. "We do not run a charity from my kitchen, Marco," Alexander stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "Dispose of the waste properly, or you will join it." Marco flinched, snatching the bag back from Alara's grasp. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. My apologies." A hot flush of humiliation burned Alara's cheeks. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the cracks between the cobblestones. But the gnawing emptiness in her stomach was a more potent master than her pride. Her rent was due tomorrow. She had nothing. Absolutely nothing. As Alexander turned to go back inside, something in her broke. Desperation, a wild, reckless vine, wrapped around her throat and forced the words out. They were louder than she intended, echoing in the narrow alley. May I have your leftovers, sir?" The question hung in the air, absurd and heartbreaking. Alexander Thorne stopped. He turned back, slowly, as if unable to believe what he had just heard. His stormy eyes narrowed, pinning her to the spot. He took a step forward, then another, his Italian leather shoes silent on the wet ground. He didn't look at the container in her hand. He didn't look at her worn-out shoes. He looked directly into her eyes. And a miracle happened. The ice in his gaze cracked. It was a subtle shift, a fracture in a frozen lake. The harsh line of his mouth softened, just for a fraction of a second. He didn't see a beggar. He saw her. The deep, forest green of her eyes, flecked with gold despite the despair that shadowed them. He saw the quiet dignity warring with a soul-crushing hunger, a story of loss etched in the delicate lines of her face. For a long, suspended moment, the alley, the rain, Marco, everything faded away. It was just the two of them, locked in a silent, profound exchange. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of a loneliness he knew all too well, a pain he kept buried beneath layers of wealth and control. In his, Alara saw not pity, but a startling, deep-seated recognition. It was as if he was looking through her, into a past or a parallel life. His voice, when he finally spoke, was different. The glacial edge was gone, replaced by a low, resonant timbre that vibrated in the space between them. "What is your name?" he asked. The question was so unexpected, so personal, it stole her breath. "Alara," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Alara," he repeated, and her name on his lips sounded like a forgotten prayer. He glanced at the container in her hand, then back to her face. "You do not ask for leftovers. Not with eyes like that." He turned to Marco, who was watching the scene with stunned disbelief. "Marco, clear my private dining room. And tell Chef Henri to prepare the tasting menu. For two." Marco's jaw dropped. "Sir, the 45 Bordeaux." "The 45, Alexander confirmed, his gaze never leaving Alara's stunned face. He then did the most unbelievable thing. He offered her his arm, not as a master to a servant, but as a gentleman to a lady. "Alara," he said, his voice firm yet impossibly gentle. "Would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner?" The world swam before her eyes. This wasn't charity. This was madness. This was a miracle. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, welled in her eyes, tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She was cold, hungry, and terrified. But in the stormy gray depths of his eyes, she saw a lifeline. Slowly, hesitantly, her cold, trembling fingers slipped into the crook of his arm. The warmth of him seeped through the fine wool of his suit, a shocking contrast to the chill of her skin. I would," she breathed. And as Alexander Thorne, one of the wealthiest men in the city, led the shivering woman from the alley into the opulent warmth of his restaurant, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. The first chapter of their story had begun not with a meeting of equals, but with a single, soul-piercing glance. And neither of them knew that the ending was already written in the scars of a forgotten past. The private dining room was a sanctuary of silence and subdued opulence. Walls of dark mahogany absorbed the soft light from a single crystal chandelier, and a floor-to-ceiling window offered a panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline. Alara sat, feeling like an imposter in a dream, her thin frame dwarfed by a plush velvet chair. Alexander sat opposite her, having shed his suit jacket. He watched her, his intense gaze both unsettling and mesmerizing. "You're safe here, Alara," he said, as the first course, a delicate amuse-bouche of caviar and gold leaf, was placed before them by a silent, wide-eyed waiter. She flinched as the silver cloche was lifted. I can't pay for this. You are my guest," he stated, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The only currency required tonight is your story." And so, between exquisite courses that tasted like heaven itself, she told him. The words, dammed up for so long, came in a hesitant, painful trickle at first, then a steady flow. She spoke of her parents, gentle artists killed in a car crash 2 years ago. She spoke of the medical debts that swallowed their estate whole, of the friends who faded away, of the slow, humiliating descent from a comfortable life to a cold studio apartment, and finally, to the alleys behind restaurants. "I was an art restorer," she said, her voice thick as she pushed a piece of seared scallop around her plate. "But the gallery let me go. No one wants to pay for beauty when they're scared. I've been applying, but there's always someone more qualified, someone with a cleaner history." She didn't mention the final, crushing blow, the rejection from the city's premier restoration studio, Thorne Heritage, just last week. It felt too cruel a coincidence. Alexander listened, his expression unreadable. He didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. He simply absorbed her pain, his stormy eyes reflecting a profound, shared sorrow. "I understand loss," he said finally, his voice low. He swirled the deep ruby wine in his glass. "I built all of this," he gestured vaguely at the room, the restaurant, the empire beyond, because I had nothing else to build it on. My family was taken from me. A long time ago. How? Alara asked softly, drawn into his gravity. He was silent for a long moment, staring into his wine as if it held the ghosts of his past. "A fire," he said, the word stark and brutal. "I was away at boarding school. They were in our country home. It was swift," they said. "A faulty wire. There was nothing left." The raw pain in his voice was a mirror of her own. Two shattered souls, finding an unexpected resonance in the ruins of their lives. The conversation shifted, lightening as the dessert, a dark chocolate sphere that melted away to reveal a passionfruit heart, arrived. They talked about art, about her love for the Renaissance masters, his for bold, modern sculptures. They talked about books, about the sea, about meaningless things that suddenly felt profoundly important. For the first time in years, Alara felt seen. Not as a victim, not as a charity case, but as a woman. And Alexander, the untouchable millionaire, felt the permafrost around his heart begin to thaw in the warmth of her spirit. As the coffee was served, he reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out not a business card, but a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. "I have a proposal, Alara," he said, his tone serious. "A business proposition. I have a private collection. Pieces that are deeply personal. They were damaged in the fire. I've never been able to trust anyone to restore them. Until now. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. You want me to. I want you to be the head of a new restoration wing I'm founding. A full-time position. A salary that will ensure you never have to stand in an alley again. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. Say yes. It was too much. A fairy tale. A miracle. Tears of overwhelming joy and relief streamed down her face. Yes, she choked out. Yes, Alexander. Thank you. A genuine, breathtaking smile transformed his face, making him look younger, vulnerable. Then it settled. He scribbled an address on a page from his notebook. This is the storage facility where the pieces are kept. The most important piece is a portrait. It's of my family. It's my only photograph of them. The one thing I managed to salvage. It's fragile, almost ruined. Can you start tomorrow? Of course, she whispered, clutching the slip of paper like a lifeline. He walked her home, to her dilapidated walk-up, a king escorting a pauper-turned-queen. At her door, he didn't try to kiss her. He simply took her hand, raised it to his lips, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was more intimate than any kiss could have been. Until tomorrow, Alara, he murmured, and then he was gone, swallowed by the night. The next morning, Alara arrived at the address, her tools in hand, her heart soaring. The facility was sterile and silent. A uniformed attendant, expecting her, wordlessly led her to a climate-controlled vault. The item you requested is in here, ma'am, he said, gesturing to a large, flat crate on a central table. With trembling, reverent hands, Alara put on her white gloves and carefully pried the crate open. This was it. The key to Alexander's heart. The portrait of the family he had lost. She lifted the protective layers of tissue paper, her restorer's eye already assessing the damage. The photograph was large, sepia-toned, curled at the edges. It was scorched along one side, the image blistered and faded. She leaned in, her breath catching as the figures began to resolve from the damage. A handsome, stern-looking man. A beautiful, gentle-eyed woman with a warm smile. And between them, a boy of about 10, with serious gray eyes and a familiar, stubborn set to his jaw. Alexander. Her eyes welled with tears for his loss. She gently began cleaning the surface, her tools moving with practiced precision. As the grime of decades was wiped away, more details emerged. The lace on the woman's collar. The pattern on the father's tie. And then, her gaze drifted to the woman's hand, resting on the boy's shoulder. On her wrist was a distinctive bracelet, a piece of Art Nouveau silverwork shaped like a twisting vine, with a single, unique emerald leaf. Alara's blood ran cold. Her own hands began to shake uncontrollably. She knew that bracelet. She had drawn it 1,000 times from memory. She stumbled back from the table, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes, wide with dawning, horrific comprehension, flew back to the woman's face. The gentle eyes. The warm smile. It was older, more refined, but undeniably. Mom, she whispered to the silent, sterile room. Her legs gave way. She collapsed to the cold concrete floor, the world shattering into a million piercing shards. The twist of fate was so cruel, so perfectly heartbreaking, it stole the very air from her lungs. The family in the portrait, the family Alexander Thorne had lost in the fire, was her family. The beautiful woman was her mother. The stern man, her father. The boy with the gray eyes, was Alexander. Her brother. The millionaire who had saved her from the alley, who had looked into her eyes and seen a miracle, was the big brother who had been sent away to school and, presumed dead in the fire alongside his parents, had never come looking for her. And she, too young to remember anything but the faint echo of a name, Alex, had never known. To look for him. He had hired her, his own sister, to restore the ghost of their family, neither of them knowing that the leftover of his past, the one he was trying to piece back together, was her.